Chapter 19, Worldview of Nutrition. When we look at a few definitions, we know hunger is that uneasy or painful sensation caused by that lack of food, that inability day after day to satisfy the basic nutritional needs. Malnutrition is failure to get those for body growth, for nutritional status. Food insecurity is an ongoing worry about where your next meal is coming from. And food security is that safe and adequate food supply that the person would have. We know hunger and malnutrition are an underlying cause of more than half of all the deaths for children, and many of them are killed by diseases that are very treatable, things like diarrhea, pneumonia, malaria, measles, because as a result of lack of food and nutrition, these are unhealthy children that die of other things. Looking at malnutrition in the United States, you can see then that a great portion is the dark green, or that high rate of malnutrition here, even in the United States. Households struggle to meet the basic needs, and they follow a typical pattern. At first, adults worry about having food, then they try to stretch the resources and juggle other necessities like paying the rent and the heating bill. The decrease quality and variety of food in the diet is then seen. Adults eat less, children are eating less, and the food that they are eating is less nutritious. We see a risk then with many on limited financial resources. They're not able to do the things that they need to do to be able to get proper nutrition. Things like bargain shopping, food crops, home cooking versus eating out are a few of the things that go along with financial resources. In looking at the group risks here in the United States, the working poor may not have quality food. People on unemployment actually have more food security than the working poor because they get that monthly food stamps from the government, whereas the working poor making just barely enough to pay the rent and not buy enough food. Food deserts, lack of access to food resources, and then as we look at many of our older adults, those economic difficulties, maybe a spouse dies and there goes, half of the income from Social Security benefits. Physical ailments such as being able to chew and swallow food, drive and get to the store to buy food. Perhaps they've had a stroke and they have some physical disabilities. So we see a lot of variety in those at-risk groups. When we look at the homeless or inadequately housed, they don't have the cooking facilities. If you're living under the bridge in a large city, they may have a little cook fire or something, but no consistent refrigeration to keep foods cold and safe in the summertime. Many of the homeless are mentally ill or do have substance abuse issues. Children are a very vulnerable group. We have growth and development that's delayed due to the lack of nutrition. When children are sick, they have decreased immune systems. They can't concentrate at school. They get poor grades. And you see that cycle of poverty continuing as a result of that. We also see more food insecurity among single parent households, or where a single parent is heading up that house. The attacking hunger in America, there are many food supply or supplemental assistance programs that vary depending on the household size and income. The Great Depression in the 1930s is when some of these programs were started, and I know working as a school nurse for a while, it is the school nurse that actually is the one that in the school system that takes in the forms to decide or follow the guidelines for children getting food assistance and free and reduced meals. Malnutrition in the developing world, when we see this ongoing cycle, it's a global problem in the world. Poverty, hunger, and malnutrition are a vicious cycle, with poverty being the most important underlying reason for chronic hunger. With population growth, the larger family is there to ensure that a child is surviving, to help care for the parent in old age. It's a source of security. And so when we look at why families have large numbers of children, it's because many of the children die in infancy and childhood. And it is also part of their culture. When we look at the urban shift, we know that the rural lands are crowded and farmland is not very fertile from drought and overuse. So people are moving to the urban areas looking for work, and that limits their ability to have like a garden and be able to grow many of their own foods. Fast-growing cities also have problems with sanitation and decreased living standards. Shanty towns or, tent towns are popping up in many of these urban areas. Women in the city work outside the home and they don't breastfeed their babies, and so we see kind of an ongoing problem with infants and getting enough nutrition, sanitary water. Infants are getting diarrhea from, bad sources of water. This malnutrition leads to infection from decreased resistance. And as I said, infectious diarrhea is a very serious complication that many infants and children die from worldwide every year. In the developing world, also, we see problems with that world food equation, oil prices and biofuels not offsetting, and then the fight against global hunger is a continuing battle that many countries are trying to help eradicate, but it just seems to be many other factors against that. Social and economic factors, as I have said, poverty is an ongoing with population growing about 3% a year. Food production is not keeping up with the population growing at 3% a year. And then that urbanization, land from agriculture is going to build cities and our suburbs. And so we're losing good, valuable land every year to the growth of urban. Political disruptions. The refugees are already weakened by chronic hunger. We have an uneven distribution of calories within families that have malnutrition. The highest priority usually goes to the father. Older boys, pregnant and breastfeeding women, and then women in general with the lowest priority, oftentimes for calories and nutrition, being seen in the pediatric or the children of that family. There is a tricky balance trying to keep the balance of agriculture and environment, especially in areas with limited rainfall. The Green Revolution has limitations. The seeds required irrigation, heavy use of pesticides. As we look at biotechnology, we know that that resistance to disease has helped as the plant is genetically altered, as we talked about in the last unit, to be able to supply more food for the world. And then when we threaten the growing in the land, that is a concern for overdependence on irrigation. Many of areas of the world are trying to farm in deserts or very dry, arid lands, and that becomes a problem when water supply runs out. Looking at the victims of malnutrition, again, we know children with very fast growth, it leaves them very vulnerable, often develops after weaning from the breast. So a child that is breastfed oftentimes has a better outcome, but when they, at whatever age, are not being breastfed, we see then where the kwashiorkor and marasmus start becoming a problem with protein and calorie malnutrition. And looking at those, remember the protein energy malnutrition. Protein is kwashiorkor. Those small children oftentimes will have edema, the little swollen bellies, and that is from the lack of protein in the diet that causes edema or the development of that third spacing into the interstitial spaces. In looking at the worldwide problem, iodine deficiency is the most common cause of preventable brain damage. It's seen where the soil is very low in iodine. Many of the mountainous areas far from the ocean tend to have more iodine deficiency. So like in the Himalayas, iodine deficiency tends to be a problem. I know Peru is another country in South America having problems with this still. Vitamin A deficiency causes that night blindness that we talked about in the vitamin and mineral nutrition unit. And then our iron deficiency is an ongoing nutritional problem with our young children and women being very susceptible to this. What we see is impairment of psychomotor development. They have a lowered resistance to disease. They're very fatigued because remember, your iron deficiency is what helps get oxygen to the tissues. And when you have a person that's anemic and pale, they're tired and fatigued. They're not able to work. And that just contributes to the overall problem in these developing countries. When we look at other deficiencies of micronutrients, zinc, calcium, thiamine, remember, is your berry, and those are common in diets that are very high in starch and root type foods. Pellagra is a decrease in niacin, and that is typically from a corn-based diet. And then scurvy is your low calcium in the diet and low vitamin C consumption. So berry, pellagra, and scurvy are other deficiencies that are still common in many developing countries. And then as we talk about obesity, they may have high calorie foods, but many of them have very low nutrient dense foods. You can eat ramen noodles very inexpensively, but they provide very little nutrition that contributes to this ongoing problem. As we look at addressing this worldwide, we know that there are programs that encourage things that help combat hunger and malnutrition, but it continues to be a problem of getting the resources to the countries and having it be allocated in a fair and equitable way without the military in many of these civil war countries taking over and getting this food that was intended for the people that are starving. AIDS and malnutrition, with the HIV virus attacking the immune system, that leaves many of your people predisposed to malnutrition. And despite the gains that we've made in eradicating malnutrition, about 30% of the world global population especially is still suffering from chronic hunger. Again, like I said, trying to get the food distributed. In some societies, the father of the family may be wrongly perceived as having the greatest nutritional needs and gets priority of that nutritious, protein, quality rich food. And that's because in many of those societies, he's seen as the breadwinner and the one that would need the nutrition the most to be able to go and work. For many of our nutritional deficiencies, we know that fortification and supplementation programs have been effective in getting to the iodine and vitamin A deficiencies. We're still working on getting some of these other deficiencies eradicated with fortification and supplementation in the food that is provided. For the hungry and homeless, we know it's concern, especially for children that are living in cars, living in parks, because they don't have a safe and place to live. And in the United States, malnutrition is still seen. We have food insecurity interlinked with poverty, and so many of our programs that are intended to help get to those children often are through the school lunch program, Women, Infants, and Children, or the WIC program, the food stamp, trying to get to the children that need this the most. As far as the environment and the growing concern, residents of industrialized world consume a lot of resources. That's us here in the United States. We use a lot of fuel, water, wood, paper, textiles, without even the thought of trying to conserve or recycle what we have. There has been the Green Revolution, where we're looking at what are we doing to our environment and where will it be in the future, and that is an ongoing thing that needs to be a consideration. And lastly, looking at who's to blame. You know, in all populations, low weight, height for age affect about 10 to 15% of preschool and school-aged children. And when we look then at the African school children, there's no significant difference between well-fed and underfed pupils on measures such as their class position, aptitude for games, and interest in education. So when we look at ending this unit and the forces and things out there in society, it is an ongoing consideration for the world, and hopefully something can be figured out to eradicate this in the future. With genetically modified foods, that is one of the most promising changes we've seen within nutrition in the past. Thank you.